As we are creating our conditions, we're going to have to start dealing with these relational and logical operators, which are fancy words that sound kind of scary. But let's just jump in and see what it is that I'm referring to. Some of this should look familiar to you, and some of it is might be just a review. The first thing I want to bring to your attention is the comparison versus the assignment operator. And what I'm talking about is sometimes you'll see in code where there's a use of a single equal sign and then a double equal sign. And is that a typo? No, it's not. And I'm going to show you the difference between the assignment operator, which is the single equal sign, and the double equal sign. So that's the comparison operator. So let's jump in and see what that's all about. All right, so one equal sign, the single equal sign is called the assignment operator, and we've already seen this in math problems, and we've been seeing it in our in some of the algorithms that we've been creating. And that's the concept that if I have this set A equal to B, for example, what I'm suggesting is whatever value is in B, remember what's on the right-hand side of the equal sign, the value of what's in the B variable gets put into the value of the A variable. So we call this an assignment. We're assigning the value on the right into the variable on the left. And this is an example where if A was 20, A is 14 and B is 27, after this statement is executed, B being 27, that value will be put into A. So after this line is executed, both of the A and the B will contain the value 27. So we've assigned with a single equal sign a value from the right side into the left side. So that's called the assignment operator. But if you see an expression with two equal signs, we call this comparison. And we're no longer putting the value of B into A, but in fact, we're looking in both variables and determining if the same value is in both. So in other words, is what's in A the same as in what's in B? So sometimes we think about, oh, is this cat equal to this cat, or is the color of this cat equal to the color of that cat? We're comparing two things, and that comparison is the double equal sign. So in this particular algorithm, we're saying, is what's in A, which is 14, the same as in what's in B, which is 27? And those are not, in fact, the same values in both of these variables, and so the returned the return answer or the result from this particular equation would be false. A compared to B are not the same. If they were both 27, then we'd get returned true. But since they are not the same, the returned result is false. Okay, so that's important to get the concept between equals and the assignment equals and the double equals, which is the comparison. All right, so let's move on to the next topic, and that's these relational operators. So here's the double equals. We're using a comparison. Exclamation point equals means is not the same or not equal to. In other words, is A not equal to 5 or something like that? And we'll see examples. This is the same that you've probably seen in your math problems. Less than, greater than, less than or equal to, or greater than or equal to. So if we were to look at that in some equations, for example, here we have two variables. A is equal to 9 and B is equal to 6 assignments. So B contains the number 6. A contains the number 9. And if we look at our if statement, our condition here is if A is greater than B. So do we look and we see, is A greater than B? The answer here is yes. So this evaluates to true. And if this expression is true, then we execute the lines inside this block. Write A is greater than B. So what the output would be is 9 is greater than 6. So if we had been the opposite, if A was less than B, if that had been, the sign had been reversed, A less than B would have been false. A is not less than B. This would have been returned a false, and we would have exited out of this end if without writing this statement. So let's look at this just to make sure we've got this clear. Is A greater than B? A is 23, B is 16. So what do you think gets returned here? I'll give you a second to think about that. A greater than B, true or false? I hope you got true. A is definitely greater than B. How about A less than B? Is A less than B true or false? That is false. Okay. This is suggesting or asking, is A greater than or equal? So if A is equal to B, this will turn true, or A is greater than B, this will return true. So is A greater than or equal to B in this case? A is definitely greater than B, so we should get A true. And then the opposite is A less than or equal to B. A is definitely not less than or equal to B, so that's going to return a false. This is asking, is A not equal to B? In other words, are these the same values or not? And in this case, they're not the same values, are they? Is A and B the same values? Nope, that is true. A is not equal to B, so that is true. You have to be careful how you read that. A is not equal to B. A is not equal to B, that's true. Are A and B the same values? A and B the same values. There's our comparison. False, they are not the same values. So make sure you're real clear on these in your head, what these symbols mean and how they work. Okay, so when we're looking at our conditions, depending on how you set it up, let's look at these two statements and see if we're going to get the same result. If number is greater than or equal to 0, then write number. Is that the same as if number is less than 0? So what we've done is just reverse the conditions, haven't we? Here we're saying if the number is positive, then write number. Here we're saying if the number is negative, well, if it was positive, would skip down to this else statement and write number, which is doing the same thing as this condition, which is saying if A is greater than equals 0, write number. So these are both doing the same thing, but we just have to be careful that we read what we're evaluating to true and false and make sure the corresponding statements match what our intentions were. In other words, if number is less than 0, make sure that the statements that are writing pertain to the negative condition being true. The negative condition being true in this particular if statement would be caught in the else portion of this block. So which is right or wrong? Neither, they're both right. You could use either one, whichever one makes sense for you, as long as the code works for the conditions you're setting up. All right, so let's look at this example. Do these two give the same result? And I'll give you a minute to look at this. Do we get the same result if age is greater than 16 is my condition on the left? If age is less than 16 is my condition on the right. What did you get? They absolutely should produce the same result because, again, you're just depending on how you're setting up your condition. If age is greater than 16, right, you can drive. If age is greater than 16, this particular condition evaluates to false, so this line won't execute and it will be caught, the program will be caught and run in the second block. So make sure, again, just paying attention to how you set up the conditions. All right, so this one is called logical operators. And the idea behind this is sometimes, well, let's just look at an example. Here we have two if statements. And these two if statements are really saying, if you read them carefully, and I'll give you a minute to look at this, if we input a value and we check to see what that value was input. If the value is less than 5, then write OK. If the value is greater than 10, write OK. So we're really writing OK if two conditions are true, right? So you're saying, if we say this out loud in English, if x is less than 5 or x is greater than 10, then write OK. Does that make sense? But what's kind of clunky is the fact that we have two different if statements to do the same, basically do the same thing. So let's look at what else we can do. We can write what we call the compound operator, where we're combining these two conditions that we saw here into one evaluation. So here we're looking at two different conditions, same thing as we did on the if statement, but now we just put it in one line. And if you read it out loud in English, it makes sense. If x is less than 5 or x is greater than 10, then write OK. So this is a valid statement, and it's certainly saving us a lot of code, a lot of clunky, and it's easier to read, isn't it? Isn't that easier for you to look at and kind of grasp what this point of this particular line is trying to do? So this is the idea of we're comparing more than one expression and deciding if both of these expressions are true and how we look at that. So let's take that another step further. So we looked at or, and I'm going to look at that a little bit more in detail here in a minute. But this particular uh, operator is and. And what and says is that both of these conditions on the left and the right have to be true in order for this whole condition to evaluate to true. In other words, we've changed our condition here a little bit, but if x is greater than 5 and x is less than 10, in other words, if x is between 6, 7, 8, or 9, this if statement will render true, right? Because if it was 6, if x was 6, x is greater than 5, that's true, and x is less than 10, that's also true. And so both of these conditions have to be true when we have and. Both the left and the right side have to evaluate to true for this whole condition to evaluate to true. So you're looking at really 3 different evaluations, right? Is this one true? Yes. And is this one true? Yes. Well, then if they're both true, then this whole both of these, this whole evaluation, this whole if condition will be true. Okay. So the next one is or. And what or is, either one of the left-hand side or the right-hand side has to be true in order for the or to return a true. In other words, is this expression true or is this expression true? If either one of them is true, the whole if condition will be true. So let's say the user put in a capital Y. Like we asked them, do you want to play again? And they put in a capital Y. Response is equal to Y, capital Y. This is true. Response is definitely not equal to little y because they put in the capital Y. But since it's an or, this whole if condition would render to true. The same thing would apply if they put in a little y. One of these conditions renders to true, so both of these evaluate. So this whole condition evaluates to true. If they put in an n, response is equal to n. No, that's false. Response, nope, this is definitely false. That's not n. So neither of these returns a true. And so the whole expression evaluates as a false or untrue. So, oh, this one's a little confusing. All right, so not is just saying evaluate what's the condition, evaluate A less than B, and whether that evaluates to, take the opposite. It's kind of like having the number 5 is positive, and then as soon as you put a negative in front of it, it becomes a negative 5. So this is kind of the same thing. If this in the parentheses, A less than B, renders true, not makes it false. If A less than B renders false, not makes it true. So let's look at an example. I know this sounds kind of squirrely, but if you just read it out loud, it kind of makes sense. So if A is 15 and B is 25, let's say, the first thing I'd look at is A less than B. A less than B is true, so not true returns a false. Okay, let's look at this one. A is 25 and B equals 10. So give you a second to try and think about that. Take the inside. Is A less than B? A less than B is false. The opposite of false then is true. So that's the not operator. So let's look at this in some examples. Oh, okay. Yes, this one. So what I want you to do is try and think about this before I flip the square, so to speak. So if x, these are the values for x and y. X is true and y is true on this line. So what I want you to think about is if this is their values, if x or y. In other words, if x is true or y is true, then this should evaluate to true. Either side has to be true. So this particular answer, x or y, is that going to return a true or a false? Well, let's see. X is true or Y is true, so that's definitely going to be true. Now, this is kind of squirrely, but if you kind of play this out loud in your head, it starts to make sense. Oh, I cheated. X and Y both have to be true in order for this evaluation to render true, and they are both true. Okay, so not X. So if X is true, the opposite of true is false, so this has to be false. Get it? Kind of, sort of? Let's try a run through the next set. Now let's look at if X is true, the values of X is true and Y is false. So is X true or Y true? Well, yes, X is true. So this evaluation will render true. Let's look at this one. Does X and Y, are both of those true? Well, nope, one of those is true and one of those is false, so this is false. Okay. Not X. So if X is true, X has to be the opposite, which is false, and that's what gets returned. Okay. All right, let's try another one. X or Y. So now X value is false and Y will render to true. So is X true or Y true? Yes, Y is true, so this is true. Is X and Y both true? No, so this evaluates there. That's false. They are not both true. Okay. If X is true, the opposite of X has to be false. Is X false? Yes, it is. So the answer is true. All right, let's try one more line. So now X is rendered to false and Y has rendered to false. Are X or Y true? Nope, they're both false. So this would return a false. Is X and Y true? Nope, they're both false. Okay. Is X true? The opposite of that is false. So is X false? Yes, it is. So that returns a true. So hopefully this makes sense to you. If it doesn't, then play this part of the video back and try and work through it again to try and understand why those values came out the way they are. It seems kind of confusing, and I appreciate that, but after you get a handle on it and you say it out loud in English, try not to get, do that illusion thing, kind of step back and say it in English, and it kind of makes sense. All right, this is important too when you're doing a compound condition. Notice here that we are comparing X is less than 5 or X is greater than 10. Recognize that it's really important to remember that when you're creating these compound statements, that even though X is the same in both of these, and you're thinking to yourself, if X is less than 5 and also greater than 10, you have to put that X in both sides. So in other words, this statement here, where I just said it out loud, X less than 5 or greater than 10, is incorrect as far as programming is concerned. If you try to do that into a language, it's not going to understand what you're saying. So get into the habit of when you use these compound operators, that you put the full expression on both sides. Don't try to shorten things up, even though you understand this, the program will. All right, so let's jump into some code and see how this all works together.